The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as Prince William walked through the ancient corridors, his footsteps echoing against the stone walls. He had been up since dawn, unable to sleep after receiving the disturbing news that would change everything between his family members. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders, but today it felt crushing. Catherine had been in the hospital for 3 days now, recovering from what the palace had called a routine procedure. But William knew the truth was far more complicated and painful than the public statements suggested. His wife had been struggling with intense pressure from within the royal family, pressure that had pushed her to a breaking point nobody saw coming. The trouble had started weeks earlier during a private family dinner at Clarence's house. Camilla, now the queen consort, had made comments about Catherine's parenting style that crossed every line of decency and respect. She had questioned Catherine's ability to raise future monarchs, suggesting that her middle-class background made her unsuitable for properly preparing their children for royal duties. William remembered how Catherine's face had gone pale that evening, how she had quietly excused herself from the dinner table. He should have followed her immediately, should have confronted Camilla right then and there. Instead, he had tried to keep the peace, hoping the situation would resolve itself naturally. That decision now felt like the biggest mistake of his life. The attacks from Camilla had continued in private conversations with other family members. She had been spreading doubts about Catherine's commitment to royal traditions, questioning whether someone from her background could truly understand the weight of monarchy. These whispers had reached Catherine through various channels, each one cutting deeper than the last. Catherine had always been strong, handling public scrutiny and media pressure with grace and dignity. But attacks from within her own family had wounded her in ways that public criticism never could. She had trusted these people, opened her heart to them, only to discover that acceptance had been conditional and fragile. The final blow had come during a charity event planning meeting. Camilla had openly criticized Catherine's ideas in front of other royal staff members, dismissing her suggestions as common and lacking proper royal understanding. The humiliation had been witnessed by dozens of people who worked closely with the royal family. That night, Catherine had broken down completely. She had told William everything through tears that seemed to pour from her soul. The months of subtle insults, the constant undermining of her confidence, the deliberate attempts to make her feel like an outsider in her own family. William had held her as she sobbed, feeling his own anger building to dangerous levels. The next morning, Catherine had collapsed during a private moment in their Kensington Palace apartment. The stress had manifested physically, requiring immediate medical attention. William had rushed her to the hospital, his heart breaking as he watched the woman he loved suffer from wounds that were invisible but devastating. Now, walking through Windsor Castle, William felt his anger transforming into something more focused and determined. He had spent 3 days watching his wife recover, 3 days thinking about how Camilla's behavior had contributed to Catherine's breakdown. The time for diplomatic silence had ended. The queen consort was in the blue drawing room, reviewing correspondence with her private secretary. William entered without knocking, his presence immediately commanding attention from everyone in the room. Camilla looked up with surprise that quickly shifted to concern as she recognized the expression on his face. "Leave us," William said quietly to the secretary, who gathered papers quickly and departed without question. The door closed with a soft click that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. Camilla attempted to maintain her composure, straightening papers on the desk before her. "William, what a pleasant surprise. How is Catherine feeling? I heard she had been unwell." The casual tone in her voice, the pretense of concern, ignited something fierce in William's chest. His hands clenched at his sides as he struggled to maintain some semblance of royal protocol. But the image of Catherine's tear-streaked face pushed him past the point of polite conversation. "Don't," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't pretend to care about her well-being when your actions have directly contributed to her suffering." Camilla's face showed genuine surprise, as if she couldn't imagine what he might be referring to. This apparent innocence only fueled William's growing rage. Did she truly not understand the damage she had caused, or was she simply that skilled at deception? "I'm afraid I don't understand what you're suggesting," Camilla replied, her voice taking on a slightly defensive tone. "I have always tried to be supportive of Catherine's transition into royal life." William took a step closer to the desk, his blue eyes blazing with an intensity that made Camilla lean back slightly in her chair. The careful mask of royal propriety was cracking, revealing the protective husband and father beneath. "Supportive?" William's voice rose slightly, though he still maintained enough control to avoid shouting.
You call months of undermining her confidence supportive? You call questioning her fitness as a mother supportive? The accusations hung in the air between them like accusations at a trial. Camilla's face had gone pale, but she maintained her posture of confused innocence. This only served to increase William's frustration and anger. You have systematically attempted to make my wife feel unwelcome in this family, William continued, his voice gaining strength and conviction. You have questioned her background, criticized her parenting, and dismissed her contributions to the monarchy. Camilla opened her mouth to respond, but William held up a hand to silence her. The gesture was so commanding, so filled with barely controlled fury, that she immediately closed her mouth and waited. Catherine is lying in a hospital bed right now because the stress you have caused her has manifested physically, William said, each word carefully enunciated and filled with accusation. My wife, the future Queen of England, has been broken down by someone who should have been supporting her. The room felt charged with tension as William's words settled around them. Camilla's careful composure was beginning to crack, revealing uncertainty and, perhaps the first hints of guilt beneath her defensive exterior. The charity event meeting, William continued, his voice now shaking with suppressed emotion. Did you think no one would tell me how you humiliated her in front of the staff? How you dismissed her ideas as common and unsuitable? Camilla's face flushed slightly, confirming that she remembered the incident clearly. Her silence spoke volumes about her awareness of her own behavior and its inappropriateness. That woman has dedicated her life to this family, to this monarchy, to preparing our children for futures they never chose, William said, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. She has sacrificed her privacy, her freedom, her ability to live a normal life, all in service to the crown. The personal cost of royal life was something William understood intimately, having lived it his entire existence. But, watching Catherine struggle with attacks from within the family had opened his eyes to how much more difficult the transition could be when support was replaced with sabotage. And how do you repay that sacrifice? William's voice was rising now, his control slipping as the full weight of his anger found expression. By making her feel like she doesn't belong, like she's somehow beneath the standards of this family? Camilla finally found her voice, though it came out smaller and less confident than usual. William, I think you may be misunderstanding my intentions. I was simply trying to help Catherine understand the complexities of royal expectations. The explanation sounded weak and rehearsed, lacking any real conviction or sincerity. William could see through it immediately, recognizing it as the same kind of justification people used when caught in behaviors they knew were wrong. Help her? William's voice cracked like a whip across the room. By telling other family members that her middle-class background makes her unsuitable for raising future monarchs? By questioning her understanding of royal traditions? Each accusation landed like a physical blow, causing Camilla to flinch visibly. The careful construction of plausible deniability was crumbling under the weight of specific examples and witnessed behaviors. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows seemed to illuminate the scene like a courtroom drama. William stood tall and imposing, every inch the future king defending his family. Camilla sat behind the desk, her usual confidence replaced by the uncomfortable realization that her actions had consequences. My children adore their mother, William said, his voice softening slightly as he spoke of Catherine's relationship with George, Charlotte, and Louis. They see her strength, her kindness, her dedication to making their lives as normal as possible despite the circumstances of their birth. The mention of the children added another layer of gravity to the conversation. These were not abstract discussions about royal protocol, but real impacts on a family that was trying to navigate an impossible balance between duty and humanity. Catherine has never once complained publicly about the pressures of royal life, William continued, his admiration for his wife clear in his voice. She has handled every challenge with grace and dignity, even when people within her own family were working to undermine her confidence. The contrast between Catherine's public grace and private suffering painted a picture of someone who had been protecting the monarchy even as it wounded her. This made Camilla's behavior seem even more inexcusable and short-sighted. William moved closer to the desk, his presence now looming over Camilla in a way that made clear the power dynamic in the room. He was not just a stepson expressing frustration, he was the future king addressing behavior that threatened the stability of the monarchy itself. I want you to understand something very clearly, William said, his voice now deadly quiet but filled with unmistakable authority. Catherine is my wife, the mother of my children, and the future Queen of England. Any attack on her is an attack on the future of this monarchy.
The words carried the weight of royal proclamation, making clear that this was not just a family disagreement but a matter of institutional importance. Camilla's face showed that she understood the seriousness of what was being communicated.
The room fell into tense silence as the full implications of the conversation settled around them.
Years of carefully maintained family relationships were being redefined in real time, with consequences that would ripple through the monarchy for years to come.
William's breathing was still elevated from the emotional intensity of confronting Camilla about her treatment of Catherine.
The 3 days of watching his wife suffer had built to this moment of reckoning, and there was still more that needed to be said. The silence in the blue drawing room stretched between William and Camilla like a chasm that had opened in the floor. William could see the wheels turning in her mind, calculating responses, measuring the damage that had been done to carefully constructed relationships. But he was far from finished with this conversation.
"Do you remember when Catherine first joined this family?"
William asked, his tone shifting to something more reflective but no less intense. She was terrified, but she was also hopeful. She believed that she was gaining not just a husband, but a family that would support and protect her. Camilla shifted uncomfortably in her chair, perhaps remembering those early days when Catherine had looked to her for guidance and acceptance.
The contrast between that hopeful young woman and the broken person lying in the hospital was stark and undeniable.
She came to you for advice, William continued, his voice gaining strength as he recalled specific instances. She asked about royal protocols, about how to handle media pressure, about how to balance public duty with private family life.
And you helped her then, or at least pretended to.
The accusation of pretense stung visibly, causing Camilla's composure to crack further. William could see that she remembered those conversations, remembered offering guidance and support that had apparently been conditional on Catherine remaining in what Camilla considered her proper place.
"What changed?" William demanded, stepping even closer to the desk. "When did helping her become undermining her? When did guidance become sabotage?"
Camilla finally spoke, her voice defensive but lacking conviction.
"I never intended to undermine Catherine.
Perhaps my concerns were expressed poorly, but they came from a place of wanting to ensure the monarchy's traditions were preserved." William's laugh was bitter and without humor.
"Traditions? What tradition involves attacking the mother of future monarchs? What protocol requires making someone feel unwelcome in their own family?"
The questions hung in the air like accusations in a trial. William could see that Camilla had no good answers, that her justifications crumbled under the weight of their obvious inadequacy. "Let me tell you what I think really happened," William said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "I think you felt threatened by Catherine's popularity, by how naturally she connected with people, by how effortlessly she embodied the qualities that make the monarchy relevant to modern Britain." The observation struck home with visible impact. Camilla's face flushed, and she looked away from William's piercing gaze. The truth was often uncomfortable, but it was particularly painful when spoken aloud by someone with the authority to make it matter. "Catherine didn't have to work for years to win public acceptance," William continued relentlessly. "She didn't have to overcome scandal or public disapproval. She walked into this role and made it look natural, made it look easy." The comparison to Camilla's own difficult journey to acceptance within the royal family was implicit but clear. William was forcing her to confront the possibility that her treatment of Catherine was rooted in jealousy rather than legitimate concern for royal traditions. "But here's what you failed to understand," William said, his voice rising again with passionate intensity.
"Catherine's success doesn't diminish you. Her ability to connect with people doesn't threaten your position.
Her natural grace doesn't make your efforts less valuable." The words carried both criticism and a kind of sad wisdom about how insecurity could drive people to destructive behavior. William was not just angry, he was disappointed in someone he had hoped would be better than her actions suggested. "Instead of celebrating what Catherine brought to this family, you chose to tear her down," William continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "Instead of recognizing that her strengths could benefit the monarchy, you decided they were somehow a threat to you."
Camilla's hands were shaking slightly as she gripped the edge of the desk.
The full weight of William's accusations was settling around her, and the defensive postures she had maintained were becoming harder to sustain. "The night of the dinner at Clarence's house," William said, his voice dropping to a more intimate but no less intense level.
"Catherine came home and cried for hours.
She asked me if she was really as inadequate as you had suggested, if her background really did make her unfit to raise our children."
The personal details of Catherine's pain seemed to hit Camilla harder than the broader accusations had. Perhaps she was beginning to understand the real human cost of words she might have convinced herself were merely constructive criticism. My wife, who has dedicated her life to being the best mother and future queen she can be, was questioning her own worth because someone she trusted had systematically undermined her confidence, William said, his voice breaking with the weight of remembered pain. The image of Catherine's self-doubt, planted and nurtured by Camilla's constant criticism, painted a picture of cruelty that was hard to deny or justify. William could see that the reality of the damage was finally beginning to penetrate Camilla's defensive barriers. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch someone you love question everything about themselves because of words spoken by someone who should have been supporting them? William asked, his voice now raw with emotion. The question was personal and piercing, forcing Camilla to confront not just the political implications of her behavior, but the human cost to real people she claimed to care about. And the children, William continued, his voice taking on a fierce protectiveness that made clear the depths of his anger. George, Charlotte, and Louis have watched their mother struggle with pressures they don't understand. They've seen her doubt herself, seen her question whether she's good enough for them. The mention of the children's suffering added another layer of gravity to the conversation. These were not abstract political consequences, but real impacts on innocent children who loved their mother unconditionally. George asked me last week if Mummy was sick because she seemed so sad, William said, his voice cracking with the memory. My 7-year-old son was worried about his mother because of stress that you helped create. The specific detail about George's concern seemed to pierce through Camilla's remaining defenses. The reality that her actions had affected not just Catherine, but the children she claimed to care about, was apparently more impactful than abstract discussions about royal protocol. How do I explain to him that some members of his own family have been working to make his mother feel unwelcome? William asked, his voice rising with indignation. How do I tell him that the institution he will someday lead has been damaged by people who should have been protecting it? The questions forced Camilla to confront the broader implications of her behavior. This was not just about personal relationships, but about the future stability and credibility of the monarchy itself. William moved around the desk, positioning himself where Camilla could not avoid making eye contact. His presence was commanding and unavoidable, making clear that this conversation would not be deflected or dismissed. Catherine has never said a negative word about you publicly, William said, his admiration for his wife's discretion clear in his voice. Even as you were undermining her privately, she maintained her dignity and protected the family's reputation. The contrast between Catherine's public grace and private suffering highlighted the unfairness of the situation. William was making clear that his wife had been the victim, not the aggressor, in this family drama. But I am not bound by her discretion, William continued, his voice taking on a threatening edge. I am not required to protect someone who has been systematically attacking my wife and, by extension, threatening the stability of my future reign. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. William was making clear that his patience had limits, and that those limits had been reached and exceeded. The palace issued statements about Catherine's hospitalization being routine, William said, his voice becoming more controlled but no less intense. But we both know the truth is more complicated. We both know that stress contributed to her collapse, and we both know where that stress originated. The acknowledgement of the hospital stay's true nature added urgency to the conversation. This was not just about hurt feelings or family disagreements, but about real health consequences that could have been much worse. I have spent 3 days watching my wife recover from exhaustion and stress that should never have been necessary, William said, his voice filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. 3 days wondering how I failed to protect her from attacks that came from within her own family. The self-reflection and guilt in William's voice added another dimension to his anger. He was not just furious with Camilla, he was angry with himself for not recognizing and stopping the situation sooner. But I will not fail her again, William declared, his voice now filled with unmistakable determination. I will not allow anyone, regardless of their position in this family, to continue undermining the woman who will be queen. The declaration carried the weight of royal authority and personal commitment. William was making clear that the dynamics of the family were about to change permanently. The afternoon light streaming through the windows had shifted, casting longer shadows across the room as the conversation stretched on. The physical environment seemed to mirror the emotional landscape, with areas of light and darkness creating a dramatic backdrop for this confrontation. Camilla finally spoke, her voice smaller and less confident than it had been at the beginning of their conversation. William, I never intended for Catherine to be hospitalized. I never wanted her to be hurt.
The admission was partial and inadequate, but it represented the first crack in her defensive posture. William could see that she was beginning to understand the seriousness of the situation, even if she was not yet ready to take full responsibility for her role in creating it. Intentions matter less than actions, William replied, his voice still hard but showing the first sign that he had heard her words. And your actions have caused real harm to someone I love, someone this family needs, someone the country respects and admires. The response made clear that apologies and explanations would not be sufficient to repair the damage that had been done. William was looking for more than acknowledgement, he was demanding fundamental changes in behavior and attitude. William could see that his words were having an impact on Camilla, but he was far from satisfied with her response. The admission that she never intended to hospitalize Catherine felt hollow and inadequate given the months of systematic undermining that had led to this crisis. You say you never intended harm, William said, his voice taking on a prosecutorial tone. But let me remind you of exactly what your actions look like to someone receiving them. He began pacing the room, his energy too intense to remain stationary. The movement gave his words additional impact, creating a sense of barely contained power that filled the space around them. First, there were the comments about Catherine's background, William began, ticking off incidents on his fingers. Casual remarks about how someone from her circumstances might not understand royal expectations. Delivered with smiles and wrapped in concern, but poisonous nonetheless.
Camilla's face showed recognition of the incidents William was describing.
Her inability to deny them made clear that these were not misunderstandings or exaggerations, but accurate accounts of her behavior. Then came the questions about her parenting, William continued, his voice gaining intensity. Subtle suggestions that perhaps the children needed more structured guidance, more awareness of their future roles. Delivered, of course, as helpful observations from someone with experience. The sarcasm in William's voice made clear his opinion of these helpful observations. He was forcing Camilla to confront how her words had been received, regardless of how she had intended them. After that, you began undermining her ideas and contributions, William said, his pacing becoming more aggressive. Dismissing her suggestions for charitable work, questioning her understanding of public engagement, making her feel like every idea she brought forward was somehow inadequate. Each accusation built on the previous ones, creating a pattern of behavior that was impossible to dismiss as accidental or well-intentioned. William was constructing a case that demanded accountability rather than excuses. And, finally, you began involving other people, William said, his voice rising with particular anger at this escalation. Sharing your concerns with other family members, making your criticism of Catherine a topic of family conversation. The involvement of other family members had transformed private criticism into public humiliation within their circle. William could see that Camilla understood this had crossed a significant line in terms of family loyalty and respect. Each step seemed small to you, didn't it? William asked, stopping his pacing to face Camilla directly. Each comment, each suggestion, each shared concern felt reasonable and justified in isolation. The psychological insight showed that William understood how destructive behavior could escalate gradually, with each step feeling justified by previous ones. But understanding did not equal forgiveness or excuse. But Catherine experienced them as a sustained campaign to make her feel unwelcome and inadequate, William said, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. She experienced them as evidence that she would never be truly accepted by the family she had married into. The shift to Catherine's perspective forced Camilla to confront the cumulative impact of her behavior. Individual incidents might seem minor, but their combined effect had been devastating to someone who was already navigating enormous pressures.
Do you know what she said to me the night before she collapsed?
William asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more impact than shouting would have. Camilla shook her head slightly, perhaps afraid to hear the answer but unable to avoid it. She said that maybe everyone was right about her, William continued, his voice thick with the pain of remembered conversation. Maybe she really wasn't good enough for this family, maybe the children would be better off with someone who truly understood royal life. The words hung in the air like an accusation and an indictment. William could see that the full impact of Catherine's self-doubt was finally penetrating Camilla's defensive barriers, finally making real the abstract concept of psychological damage. My wife, who has dedicated her life to being the best mother and partner she can be, was questioning whether she should step back from the roles she loves because someone had convinced her she wasn't worthy of them, William said, his voice rising again with renewed anger. The irony was sharp and undeniable. Catherine's selfless consideration of stepping back proved exactly why she was so suited for royal life, while the behavior that had driven her to consider it demonstrated a lack of the grace and wisdom that royal positions required. That night, I held her while she cried and told me she felt like a failure, William continued, his voice cracking with the memory. I had to convince the woman I love, the mother of my children, the future Queen of England, that she was worthy of her place in this family. The personal intimacy of the moment William was sharing made the situation feel even more serious and consequential. This was not just about public roles or institutional relationships, but about the private pain of someone who had trusted her family to support her.
And where were you while this was happening? William asked, his voice taking on an accusatory edge. You were probably congratulating yourself on helping Catherine understand royal expectations, weren't you?
The question forced Camilla to confront the disconnect between her self-perception and the reality of her impact. William was making clear that good intentions, if they had ever truly existed, did not excuse destructive outcomes. I want you to imagine something, William said, his voice becoming more controlled but no less intense. I want you to imagine that every criticism you made of Catherine had been made about you during your own integration into this family. The comparison was pointed and personal, forcing Camilla to consider how she would have felt receiving the treatment she had given to Catherine. The exercise in empathy was long overdue but potentially transformative. Imagine that every question about your fitness for royal life, every doubt about your background, every suggestion that you weren't quite suitable had been shared with other family members, William continued relentlessly. The hypothetical scenario was creating visible discomfort for Camilla, perhaps because she could remember her own struggles for acceptance and recognition within the royal family. The parallel was uncomfortable but undeniable.
How would that have felt? William demanded.
How would it have affected your confidence, your sense of belonging, your ability to perform your duties effectively? The questions were rhetorical but powerful, forcing Camilla to acknowledge that the treatment Catherine had received was not something she would have accepted for herself. But here's the crucial difference, William said, his voice taking on an edge of particular intensity. You had Charles defending you, protecting you, fighting for your acceptance within this family.
The contrast was stark and painful.
Camilla had benefited from protection and support that she had then failed to provide to Catherine, despite being in a position to offer it. Catherine had me, of course, William continued, but she also deserved support from other family members, particularly from women who understood the challenges of joining this institution. The expectation of sisterly support made Camilla's behavior seem even more cruel and short-sighted. She had been uniquely positioned to help Catherine navigate royal life, having done so herself under more difficult circumstances. Instead, you chose to become part of the problem rather than part of the solution, William said, his disappointment clear in his voice. You chose to add to her pressures rather than help her manage them. The characterization of Camilla as part of the problem was harsh but accurate based on the evidence William had presented. Her behavior had actively made Catherine's situation more difficult rather than easier.
And now we're here, William said, gesturing around the room as if it represented the culmination of all the poor decisions that had led to this confrontation. My wife is in the hospital, my children are worried about their mother, and the monarchy has been weakened by internal conflict that should never have existed. The summary of consequences made clear the far-reaching impact of what might have seemed like minor family disagreements. William was forcing Camilla to confront the institutional damage her personal behavior had caused. I need to know that you understand the seriousness of this situation, William said, his voice taking on the tone of someone issuing an ultimatum. I need to know that you comprehend how your actions have damaged not just Catherine, but the future stability of the crown. The demand for understanding was the first step toward demanding change. William was making clear that acknowledgement of the problem was a prerequisite for any path forward. The woman lying in that hospital bed will be queen someday, William continued, his voice filled with both protectiveness and pride. She will represent this country on the world stage, she will be a symbol of continuity and stability for millions of people. The reminder of Catherine's future role added weight to the current situation. Attacks on her were not just personal cruelties, but threats to the institution she would someday embody. Every doubt you have planted in her mind, every moment of insecurity you have created, has the potential to affect her ability to serve in that role effectively, William said, his voice rising with the implications of this reality. The connection between current psychological damage and future institutional effectiveness was a powerful argument for why Camilla's behavior had been not just cruel, but actively harmful to the monarchy's interests. You have potentially weakened the future queen because of what? William demanded. Because you felt threatened by her natural abilities? Because you were jealous of her easy acceptance by the public? The questions cut to the heart of William's theory about Camilla's motivations, forcing her to confront unflattering truths about herself and her behavior. Camilla finally spoke again, her voice shaky and defensive. I was trying to help her understand the complexities of royal life. These positions come with enormous responsibilities, and I wanted to ensure she was prepared. The explanation sounded rehearsed and unconvincing, particularly in light of the detailed account William had provided of her actual behavior. It felt like an attempt to reframe cruelty as concern after the fact. Prepared for what? William shot back immediately. Prepared to doubt herself? Prepared to question her worth? Prepared to consider stepping back from roles she was born to excel in? The rapid-fire questions made clear that William found her explanation inadequate and insulting. He was not going to allow her to rewrite history or minimize the impact of her actions. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point, with years of family dynamics and months of specific incidents converging into this moment of reckoning. William was prepared to continue this confrontation until he received the accountability and commitment to change that Catherine deserved. The excuse Camilla had offered hung in the air between them like smoke, dissipating under the weight of William's incredulous stare. Her attempt to reframe months of systematic undermining as helpful guidance had only served to increase his anger and disappointment. Help? William repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. You think what you did was help? Let me tell you what help actually looks like when someone joins this family. He began moving around the room again, his restless energy a physical manifestation of the fury still burning within him. The afternoon light had shifted further, casting the scene in deeper shadows that seemed appropriate for the darkness of the conversation. Help is offering genuine guidance based on your own experiences, William said, his voice taking on an instructional tone. Help is sharing the strategies that worked for you when you faced similar challenges. The contrast he was drawing between helpful behavior and Camilla's actual actions was stark and undeniable. William was making clear that he knew the difference between support and sabotage. Help is defending the new family member when others question their fitness or their background, William continued, his voice gaining intensity. Help is using your own hard-won acceptance to smooth the path for someone else. The reminder that Camilla had once been in a similar position, fighting for acceptance within the royal family, made her failure to support Catherine seem even more inexcusable. Help is not sharing your doubts about someone with other family members, William said, his voice rising with particular anger. Help is not undermining their confidence by constantly questioning their decisions and abilities. Each point built on the previous ones, creating an indictment that was becoming impossible for Camilla to deflect or minimize. William was systematically dismantling any justification she might offer for her behavior. And help is certainly not humiliating someone in front of staff members by dismissing their ideas as common and unsuitable, William said, his voice cracking with the remembered pain of hearing about that particular incident. The specific reference to the charity meeting seemed to hit Camilla harder than the more general accusations had. Perhaps because it had been witnessed by so many people, or perhaps because she knew it had been particularly cruel and unnecessary. Do you have any idea how many people witnessed that moment? William asked, stepping closer to her desk again. How many people saw you dismiss the future queen as if she were some sort of amateur volunteer? The public nature of the humiliation had made it even more devastating for Catherine. William was making clear that Camilla's behavior had not just caused private pain, but public embarrassment that had been witnessed by people who worked closely with the royal family. Those people talk to each other, William continued, his voice taking on a threatening edge. They share what they see and hear. Your treatment of Catherine has become a topic of discussion among the very staff members who need to respect and support her. The implication that Camilla's behavior had undermined Catherine's authority with staff members added another dimension to the damage that had been caused. This was not just about personal feelings, but about professional effectiveness. How is she supposed to lead charitable initiatives when the people supposed to implement them have heard you dismiss her ideas as inadequate? William demanded. The practical consequences of Camilla's behavior were becoming clearer as William articulated them. Her actions had not just hurt Catherine emotionally, but had potentially compromised her ability to perform her royal duties effectively. How is she supposed to command respect from courtiers and advisors when they have witnessed senior family members undermining her authority? William asked, his voice rising with the implications.
The questions were forcing Camilla to confront the institutional damage her personal behavior had caused. William was making clear that attacks on Catherine were attacks on the monarchy itself. "You have potentially crippled the effectiveness of the future queen because of your own insecurities," William said.